Welcome to Focus KSA. I'm Patrick Ryan from the Saudi-U.S. Relations Project, or SUSRIS.com. Focus KSA is a joint project between SUSRIS and the Saudi-U.S. Trade Group. We have a special edition today. We're with Dr. Theodore Karasik, the Director of Research and Consultancy at INEGMA, a think tank in the United Arab Emirates. We're bringing you a special program today so that Dr. Karasik can talk about some developments in the Arabian Peninsula, the region that a lot of people are focusing on today, not just the specialists who always look at what's happening in the Gulf and the region, but it's attracted worldwide attention for the number of crises that have beset the area that Western and local decision makers and policy makers are having to grapple with, and Dr. Karasik has been kind enough, as he always is with SUSRIS, to talk to us about the perspective from the Gulf on these issues and some of the inside information and details that he is aware of through his contacts in the Gulf. So we're pleased today to welcome back to Focus KSA Dr. Ted Karasik. Ted, good day. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you.
Let's start with an issue that's probably made the biggest news this week: the ongoing campaign in Iraq with ISIS, or the Islamic State, ISIL, Daesh, as the various incarnations of names have portrayed this phenomenon, which started with the civil war in Syria and has stretched into Iraq and threatens the stability of Iraq. First campaign towards Baghdad, and then fighting in the north. And the U.S. Becoming involved at Mount Sinjar, and now protecting the Mosul Dam. And yesterday there was a press conference at the Pentagon. Secretary Hagel and our chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dempsey, they were talking about the degree of the threat, and all eyes are on Iraq and ISIL and the Islamic State. So why don't you give us your perspective on what's going on in this in this area?
Very good, thank you. I think it's very important to understand the Islamic State and its ideology and its drivers for what it's trying to do. I think one of the first places to look at that is the release of two very glossy English language magazines called Dabiq. Dabiq is the legendary place in Syria where the final battle will occur, according to apocalyptic discourse in Islam. This is highly significant because this publication, which by the way is made in Berlin, is being distributed to English readers as a recruitment tool, but also to show people that the group has intentions about hotwiring the apocalypse. And that means to make the apocalypse come sooner. Right now, what ISIS is trying to do is to be violent through this decapitation of Jim Foley, and also to make the U.S. and the UK try to come to Iraq to fight ISIS on the ground. This is part of the apocalyptic discourse, to have the final battle between true believers and the Crusaders. At the same time, ISIS has been developing its order of battle. We need to look at what they've been able to capture. They have French, British, Russian, and American equipment. A lot of the American equipment is brand new, it's advanced. They have missiles, they have man-pads, they have armaments that they can put together to use in attacks. They haven't even started this yet, and at the same time, they also have been able to put together UAVs and to be able to conduct overhead flights. They use these UAVs, they use 4 of them when they tried to enter Jordan in about a month or so ago. These were just one-way flights, but they were able to get the imagery. And then on July 25th, they were able to actually put together what we would call a UCAV that was 8 meters from wingtip to wingtip, and was of a East European airframe that apparently had on it fuel-air explosives. The Jordanians were able to bring this down because it came from central Syria over into Jordan, right around where CENTCOM Forward is. The Americans wanted to shoot it down with Patriot. The Jordanians wanted to bring it down because they wanted to investigate what it was. And lo and behold, the Islamic State is able to put together crude but potentially effective UCAVs. This sets off all kinds of analysis necessary to determine what the Islamic State's order of battle is and what they may be doing in the future, because what they plan to do is to continue to carve up and carve out real estate in order to capture the resources and the hearts and minds of other people that surround the current battle area.
Well, it seems that the airstrikes in the north have blunted the offensive that threatened the Kurdish region and has pushed back the Islamic State somewhat. What's the thinking as to their actual strength when faced with a determined and well-equipped foe such as the U.S. forces that have been employed in the north?
Interestingly enough, the perception from here is that the U.S. is not doing enough airstrikes, and local forces want, local leaderships want these airstrikes to expand because they see ISIS as a group who will be able to fade away and then quickly come back. This is also part of ISIS's plan, is to be able to go out, grab something significant of strategic interest, and see how long they can hold it, then withdraw back. They're good at using camouflage for some of their equipment. They have plenty to spare, so doing targeting of artillery or of Humvees or whatever only barely scratches the surface. They could even flee back to Syria, and since there's no air campaign there yet, they might be able to regroup and then go ahead and try to strike out again. So I call this a Band-Aid solution, and it's fairly loose.
Right. Well, the press conference yesterday, I think it came out that there had been 90 strikes to date, and those primarily were to prevent attacks against the Yazidi who had moved to Sinjar Mountain, and then in and around the dam. I think it was discussed that really the only way to take on the Islamic State in a full assault to do its severe damage was to go into Syria. But what's the what in your mind is likely to happen in that regard? Because the United States, as we know, has the domestic concerns, first of all, about getting involved in Iraq again, but the thought of opening up a campaign in Syria is maybe not a bridge too far, but it's a long distance bridge for policymakers to get to. There was a Pew Research poll earlier this week which said the American public was just narrowly in the majority to use force in the north for humanitarian purposes, but it has yet to come around to getting back into Iraq in a major way.
Unfortunately, ISIS is such a threat, and as was presented at the Pentagon within the last 24 hours, that there needs to be a substantial campaign against ISIS in Syria. Now, Assad's Air Force has already struck ISIS. This is not enough. The Russians may get drawn into this to support the Syrians. To be an international campaign to target ISIS in Syria, because mitigating this group now is imperative because of what appears to be their plans for expansion further into Syria and into Jordan and into Saudi Arabia, as well as in Kuwait. Kuwait is probably the one state that's the most susceptible because Kuwait has the proper ingredients inside of the country for those people who actually support ISIS. There's money coming from Kuwait to ISIS. There's the tribal factor in Kuwait that sees what's happening in Iraq. They tend to gravitate towards this as an alternative style of government. Having said all that, the United States really needs to think hard about conducting air attacks in Syria and making an agreement, even if temporary, with Assad, because this threat from ISIS is greater than any threat from Assad. It's the lesser of two evils. So there needs to be a discussion about this in Washington, serious and fast, in order to make a determination of how to move forward in this arena.
Can you comment about the dimension of the forces used against ISIS, the Islamic State, in Iraq? We saw that the Iraqi forces collapsed in front of the campaign initially, but now there's been some political evolution in Baghdad, and presumably a lot of hand-holding from others to get the central government in Iraq to face up to this threat. We also have the Kurds in the north who had fought against the Islamic State and had asked for additional support. Presumably that support has been provided. It seems to have gone well around the Mosul Dam. What's the correlation of forces and the prospects in Iraq for non-U.S. ground activity?
It seems that the Iraqis, along with the Kurds, are finally patching up their differences because of the threat from the Islamic State. And as you said, Pat, the advisors on the ground, the Americans, seem to be helping in this regard. I think that there are two main wild cards here. One are the Shiite militias that have yet to really act out in any fashion. And the second is what the Iranians are planning to do in Iraq. It seems that both the Shiite militias and the Iranians are standing back and waiting to see what happens. I think that's an invitation for ISIS to try to provoke a sectarian battle. We have to recognize also that the Iraqi military, which was mostly a Shiite force, now contains no Sunnis practically. So when we look at engagement between ISIS and the Iraqi military, it is a Sunni Shiite battle, which is something that ISIS wants. I think also that you're going to see the Iraqi military, along with the Kurds and the Peshmerga and so on. We even saw the PKK get involved, and we might even see PJAK get involved too, in order to protect the interests of the Kurds. But we're also haven't seen yet, but we might see activity towards the south, where the real oil fields are and where the major production is. ISIS may want to strike out there. That's when the Shiites will get involved, because that's mostly their territory.
We're talking with Dr. Theodore Karasik, the Director of Research and Consultancy at INEGMA, a think tank in the Gulf, and he's been kind enough to join us today to provide a snapshot of what's happening in Iraq. And we're going to shift gears and talk about GCC developments. We don't want to bury the lead, Ted, but there's a lot going on in the GCC as well, as you've been keeping us up to date with. Any last thoughts on Iraq and the Islamic State and prospects there?
I just think that the Islamic State does represent this major threat. I think, I know the GCC states are preparing their homeland security, or already have, to watch out for this threat, watch out for recruitment, or finances, and so on. I think that the GCC states are also looking for international assistance, particularly from the U.S. and from the U.K., on what to do about ISIS. They are also turning towards the Russians, despite the Ukraine-Russia confrontation. These are all becoming interconnected together, plus Gaza and the Israelis, to make for what I'm calling an unholy mess. This is all interconnected now, so one event could lead to the equivalent of knocking over a stack of cards, if you will, or a house of cards.
Right. Well, let's turn to the GCC, and as I said, I don't want to bury the lead, but you've got some reporting and analysis to do on developments in the Gulf. Do you want to
Yeah, I'll
start
go
us
ahead
off?
and take the lead on that. First of all, there's a major development brewing regarding Qatar's membership in the GCC. It appears that Qatar has not adhered to the Riyadh Agreement signed late last year. There were 37 action items that the Qataris had to do in order to maintain good relations or reestablish relations with the other Gulf states. The bulk of these action items have not been done. So there is now a move on to suspend Qatar from the GCC. This is occurring at the same time that in Oman, the Sultan apparently is terminally ill with pancreatic cancer, and we'll have a succession question there, but it also takes Oman out of the dispute. There is talk, as it was when the ambassadors were pulled from Qatar, that there will be a closing of the border between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, as well as potential for a sea blockade of Qatar in order to get Doha to reverse its actions. Of course, if this moves through, this will push Qatar closer to Turkey and to Iran, which is the emerging new bloc. And we've seen that already in the negotiations regarding Gaza. The GCC states are very angry with the United States because Secretary of State Kerry was pushing for the Turkey-Qatar plan as opposed to the Egypt-Saudi Arabia plan. So this is another division line being formed. On top of that, in this coming week, there's a meeting of Muslim scholars in Turkey where, of course, there's a new, more powerful president with the foreign minister now as prime minister. Turkey now is a major supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood. This clerical meeting will feature Kawadawi and other senior clerics who will be electing a new leader, and this looks like that it's going to be very much a way for Qatar to come under the umbrella of Turkey and vice versa. So we have these division lines appearing, and on top of that, we have the Houthis closing in on Sana'a. There appears to be a plan to take Sana'a and then divide it into 12 districts in order to take over the country and perhaps have the prime minister become the new acting leader. This, of course, is going to set Yemen off into another spasm of violence and will also make the Saudis nervous about what's happening to their south and to their north. And please note that ACAP in Yemen has basically gone silent, which is illustrative of what is happening with the Houthis in Sana'a. And I recently have been talking about the emergence of new emirates across the MENA region, and we may perhaps see a new emirate pop up in Yemen very soon as a means of governance.
Right. We were able to share with your blessing that important essay that you wrote for Al Arabiya about the 30-year war in the Islamic Emirates. So that's a on target piece. You said ACAP in Sana'a went silent. What is that?
ACAP hasn't really been doing as much activity as they were doing. It might be related to the Houthis closing in on Sana'a. It could also be that they've undergone a period of quiet in terms of their internal disputes, because we've had several ACAP members come out and pledge bayat or allegiance to the Islamic State. This is a phenomena that is slowly taking off throughout the Al-Qaeda franchises, of a division developing within their leadership and within their ranks about who to follow. Is it al-Baghdadi or to follow al-Zawahiri? And so this might be a reason why ACAP has gone quiet. Or
Okay,
it just might be a lull.
are you talking about AQAP, Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
sorry, I need to catch up on my acronym pronunciation.
No problem.
So, unholy mess in the north, unholy mess in the south, and a political unraveling in the Gulf. You had mentioned developments in Oman as well that you want to discuss?
Mm-hmm. Yes, apparently the Sultan of Oman is terminally ill with pancreatic cancer. He's supposedly in a hospital in Germany. What will happen with Oman when he passes away, which could be whenever, there will be a process where the Defense Council and or the Family Council will come together in order to determine who the new Sultan will be. There's speculation about who will be the next Sultan, and I think some of the states in the GCC want to make sure that the next Sultan is someone who will be an active participant in terms of what's happening in the region, to perhaps be a negotiator, but also to be more closer to the Riyadh's line. You do see a lot of activity between the kingdom and Oman, both politically and economically, in the last 6 to 8 months. I think this is an important development. Of course, Riyadh was using Oman for negotiations with the Iranians about some kind of reconciliation, although that seems to have fallen apart because of what's happening in Iraq. So we're going to have to watch and see who may be the candidates, and of course there are rumors about a letter or a will that contains 3 to 5 names of potential candidates, or who will be the successor. It looks like that the successor may be someone from the military, which would make sense.
Well, it's certainly more worrisome news from the region. It was just the other day that the Diwan of the Royal Court in Muscat issued a statement that he was in good health. So apparently this is not yet in the public domain. How reliable do we take the reporting of his health?
Well, of course you have to be very careful with information that you receive, but usually in conversations that I've had with now 3 individuals about this who are pretty reliable, I would tend to agree with their assessment, which is why I'm speaking about it now.
Right. I can appreciate the sensitivity of that, and it is always curious that when someone issues a report of someone's good health, that that's the time to start digging into what's behind it.
Well, I think that clearly people who study Oman have looked at this issue. They know that one day it will come, and what the constellation will be at that time will play into what will happen in the country. Of course, the country is divided into a couple of different sectors, if you will, between north and south, and also between the Wadi and the coastline. And you have other factors, for example, with illegal supply routes in the south that go into Yemen and so on. So there's a lot of issues that could creep up, and all of a sudden we're dealing with a whole new ballgame in the southeastern tip of the Arabian Peninsula that we didn't see 2 or 3 months ago. So I think this needs to be taken under consideration.
Well, it's clearly, as I said, a worrisome development in Oman, and coupled with the political troubles in the GCC and military political troubles in the region, portends for lots of interesting times for analysts such as yourself. And I'll remind everyone that this is Focus KSA, a joint project of the Saudi-U.S. Relations Information Service, SUSRIS.com, and the Saudi-U.S. Trade Group. We're here with Dr. Theodore Karasik, the Director of Research and Consultancy at INEGMA in the United Arab Emirates. And Ted, as always, we appreciate your time. I know you're pressed for time, so we'll just wrap it up. We've gone through the situation in Iraq with the Islamic State, what's happening there, its military vibrancy, the prospects for dealing with it, which include having to get more involved, going against it in Syria, the developments in the GCC with Qatar, the prospects for the Houthis in Yemen. Can you draw the postscript for us here and put this all in some context, and perhaps inform us what implications are for Riyadh and for the United States in the near and midterm?
Yeah, I think that the near-term implications are is that the U.S. and the Saudis are going to have to work closely together, even though they may have major differences about many issues in the region. Clearly, Saudi Arabia has been relying on Egypt and Pakistan to help fortify the north, despite what Prince Mithap said during his visit up there along the border. There is also a requirement for Saudi Arabia to be watching very carefully the growing influence of ISIS within Saudi Arabia. There is this disconnect between the elders, if you will, within the clerical universe and the young people. There's this issue of why no fatwa has been issued by the Saudi clerics regarding ISIS, and the reason is basically because young people don't listen to the older clerics because they're seen as being part of the government. The U.S. needs to re-engage with Saudi Arabia plus their Gulf allies to show them back down like they have in Syria, as well as the mess, in their perception, that in the mess that they created in Iraq. It's time for the United States to stand up and actually make a stand in order to protect the rest of the region. And that means that the United States and Saudi Arabia need to work with their other allies in order to have a coalition come together very quickly to deal with ISIS, because this group is very, very dangerous, and there are myself and some other colleagues feel that we're upon another 9/11 type moment, and what that could how that could take shape and when, it needs to be thought out very carefully.
Well, we appreciate your time again, Ted, and thanks for all that. We'll continue to trust your availability to keep us up to date on these things that may be flying below the radar on this side of the pond. We're eternally grateful for your insights and perspectives and breaking news reporting. This is Patrick Ryan at Focus KSA, and we've been talking with Dr. Theodore Karasik, the Director of Research and Consultancy at INEGMA in the United Arab Emirates, and we will keep you up to date on these stories and more. Ted, have a great evening in the Gulf, and we're signing out here.
I will. Thank you, Pat.